Thanks everyone for joining today. We'll be starting our webinar now. I'm joined by Julie Wood, our COO, and today we'll be talking about navigating clinical trial data sharing under the new Declaration of Helsinki and talking a bit about the revisions that impact data reuse. We'll also talk about the practical steps for instituting an ethical and effective data sharing program. Let me step through our agenda for today, and thank you so much for joining us. So today we'll talk about, again, the Declaration of Helsinki revisions. Oh, sorry, this has a bit of a mind of its own. Some of the revisions to the 8th Amendment to the Declaration of Helsinki. We'll also talk about some of the motivations and drivers for data sharing. And then I'll turn it over to Julie Wood, our COO, and talk about some of the key components of a data sharing program. When the 3 W's, when we should begin a program, how to manage a data sharing program, and what is the role of a potential partner to help manage this type of program. So let's chat through the new Declaration of Helsinki revisions. The 2024 revisions were adopted after a fairly lengthy 30-month process, including input by a number of different stakeholders across about 20 countries. The DOH, or Declaration of Helsinki, is considered a living document, unlike some other ethics documents such as the Belmont Report. The Declaration of Helsinki was established by the WMA, or the World Medical Association, in 1964. These major revisions came on its 60th anniversary and are considered a major revision. The DOH is considered a cornerstone or foundational ethical guideline in medical research involving human participants. Interestingly, this one came with a number of other guiding documents. So of course we have the document in itself on the WMA website, but some helpful other documents that were put up by the chair, Dr. Jack Resnick. So we have here the JAMA Open article that was put out by Jack Resnick in October that came out in conjunction. And it's really supposed to be a companion document to help understand the document itself. So it's an excellent reference. And then he also had an accompanying podcast and interview that came out in conjunction with the DOH. So let's just step through a few of these major or key revisions now. So the revised DOH came out with a few really interesting changes. Some of them people think were long overdue. So first of all, there's a broadening of the scope of DOH, calling on all of those that are currently involved in the research enterprise to uphold these principles, including teams, individuals, and organizations. And this comes in the front section, what we call the preamble. Now, some might question the WMA's authority to address non-physicians. After all, they're the World Medical Association, this umbrella organization for physicians, but it really serves as a foundational document for ethical guidelines in medical research involving human participants, and it's really referenced in almost all clinical trial protocols, after all. The second one is a terminology update, and some, including myself, thinks this is long overdue. And here they're really replacing the term subjects with the term participants to recognize a true partnership with those that participate in clinical trials. This is out of respect for, equal partnership or engagement and the rights of an agency and the importance of these individuals as partners in research. The third one is a really interesting section involving in paragraph 19 and 20, and it's really a paradigm shift in how they think about vulnerable populations, a shift from really more protective inclusion that often led to exclusion of vulnerable populations, such as pregnant women, women in general, and prisoners involved in clinical trials, to a more inclusive approach that balances protection with the imperative to address health inequities. And I think any of you that might conduct research, it's great to really read this and see how they've really shifted their perspective in terms of what is considered a vulnerable population by fostering participation under ethically sound conditions. And they're really trying to benefit all segments of society with these two paragraphs. So now let's shift to paragraph 32. Many of you here are here to learn and discuss together as a community about data sharing and secondary reuse of data. So here, this is a complete revision of the previous 32nd paragraph. Before, if you looked at the previous revision, this really focused on biobanking. And in this current era, it's been updated for what we think of as the modern era of databases. And this really demonstrates that they've really thought a great deal about how this section really needs to encompass not just biobanking, but AI and what that really means for databases and platforms and repositories. So let's dive in and dissect this new paragraph 32 a bit more and what it might mean for platforms and repositories. Again, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section as we move through. We'll move through fairly quickly. The slides will be available as well as the recording. So prior versions of paragraph 32 really stressed informed consent in biobanking. This revision reaffirms that participants must explicitly consent to collection and storage of their identifiable data. It makes it clear that consent is required not just for primary research, for example, a clinical trial, but also for ongoing storage and potential future uses of such data. It makes it clear that consent is not just required for primary research, but also for ongoing storage and potential future uses of such data. It's really interesting as you read through also the companion documents that they realize that research has now evolved to include AI, so artificial intelligence, and ML, machine learning, and genetic testing in research. And pertinent to our discussions today, the ability of computers to potentially re-identify de-identified data sets. Even Dr. Resnick mentioned commercial and political misuse of data, potential misuse of data. So it's important for him and the task force to rewrite this for the free and informed consent of the secondary consent of the collection and processing for these foreseeable risks. So unanticipated secondary research on data from long time ago, so this last paragraph, when it's not possible to obtain such consent of secondary research on stored data may only be conducted after the approval of a research ethics committee. We think of maybe in the US as an IRB. This cross-references to the Declaration of Taipei. This is a cross-reference document. This was adopted by the WMA about 8 years ago, and it provides ethical guidelines on the collection, storage, and use of health data and biological materials and medical research. So we don't have time to dive into that too much, but again, this requires, really looks at identifiable and re-identifiable information. So let's just summarize this section a bit, citing concerns about AI/ML, genetic data collection, and capacity to potentially re-identify de-identified data. Relevance to platforms such as Vivli, and we'll talk a bit more about the Vivli data sharing platform, but platforms such as Vivli in situations where all data stored are anonymized. The revisions to the Declaration of Helsinki and Declaration of Taipei do not apply since we only accept anonymized data. Now, if you are currently storing data in a platform that has de-identified data, this does apply to you. But we at Vivli are currently increasingly reviewing our policies regarding AI and machine learning. As Dr. Resnick, the chair of the DOH, mentioned, there are increasing concerns with AI technologies contributing to data re-identification. Next, I'm going to move to a section on, sorry about that, why should we share it? So there are certainly a number of scientific and ethical reasons to share, advancing science, which facilitates meta-analysis and systematic reviews, increasing trust and transparency in the scientific process, supporting evidence-based guidelines. We've seen these come out of our own platform, improving research efficiency, which really drives reducing duplication of efforts, for example, driving new innovation, and ensuring the ability to reproduce science. I think these are all important motivations for why those that are sharing clinical trial data and research are doing so. So we can't forget the patients themselves that participate in clinical trials to potentially benefit themselves and advance the field to bring future treatments to others. And most importantly, if the data is not shared, it's used only one time to answer usually one question, the primary outcome, rather than leveraging their contributions to enter multiple lines of inquiry. So if the data is shared, it can go on and on to answer multiple questions in secondary reuse. So I wanted to share one data slide with you. Our researchers self-report the reasons they are conducting analyses on Vivli. So they can choose more than one answer, so keep that in mind. And most researchers say that they're conducting new research or looking for new answers in safety or efficacy when they're conducting analyses on Vivli. Meta-analyses, confirming research, although lots of times when they're checking off confirming research, they're also checking off other boxes, just so you know. So that's about 14%. Looking at statistical methods or doing training of methodologies or supporting trial design, or there's other, sometimes they check off other. Looking at key drivers of data sharing, there are primarily 4 key drivers of data sharing as we see them. And I'll go through these one by one and detail them in the next few slides. So we've seen these over the last 10 years working together to change the culture of data sharing, albeit somewhat slowly over the last 10 years. So these are really funders such as the NIH with their new data sharing policy, but others as well, such as the Gates Foundation, Wellcome, Helmsley Charitable Trust, that have put in place their own data sharing policies for their researchers. Industry commitments, government policies, and journals. These are really working collectively to push data to be shared and reused. So let's step through these one at a time and see how they're working to push data to be shared. You know, in terms of journals being a driver of data sharing, in 2017, the ICMJE, a very influential group, actually had decided that there has to be a data sharing statement for clinical trials as a requirement, and that trial manuscript submissions must include a data sharing statement. And as a trialist, if you were going to publish in this group of journals, a very influential group, you must describe how your individual participant level data, so what we call the raw data or IPD, include how that would be shared. Now, IPD share is not really required, but we've noticed that some journals are really requiring the data to be shared for trials. So that includes the BMJ and PLOS. And we are seeing that trickle-on effect as those trials are now being shared in our platform. So how do we assist researchers in fulfilling the ICMJE's requirements? So we're one platform, and I can only talk about Vivli, and I'm sure other platforms might see the same. To include a data sharing statement in their manuscript submissions, as well as sharing their data sets through providing a digital object identifier, which can be referenced in a publication, ensuring long-term accessibility of the data, ensuring the data are fair, and then providing access during the review process to the data as necessary for sponsors. So that's an interesting thing that we've been seeing more and more. And when Julie speaks, she can show you a case study of this as well. This is working hand in hand with ct.gov or clinicaltrials.gov as a driver of data sharing. So ICMJE requires registration of your data sharing plan at the time of trial registration. So all clinical trials have to be registered on a register, and ct.gov is one of those registers. So a data sharing plan is part of the ct.gov record. Sponsors and investigators must decide whether to share IPD and how it will be accessed as part of their studies design during registration. Undecided is allowed in what we call element 12. There are many elements as part of your registration record in ct.gov, but it's not allowable by the ICMJE journal. So you can answer these questions. Yes, there's a plan to make my data available, no, or undecided. So let's just see how this actually plays out. Element 12, which pertains to the data sharing statement, plays a role in encouraging researchers to consider and plan for data sharing. I personally wish that this was a mandatory field and everyone had to fill out all of the fields, because we see that sometimes those fields are filled out fairly nebulously. But this requirement, introduced in 2017, adds these additional fields so sponsors and PIs may disclose their intent to share IPD and outline how they may do so. We are seeing investigators and certainly industry sponsors do so, and as they're listing their trials on ct.gov, can direct users to specific platforms or repositories, because as a researcher, you want to know where the data is, whether it's on Vivli or some other platform, so you can actually go find that data when the trial is completed. I think that's a really useful place as a central place to find that data. So I think these two policies work hand in hand. The next driver is industry commitments as a driver for transparency. Pharma is working to enhance transparency and public trust, advance innovation through data access. FPN pharma members commit to sharing data responsibly according to these principles with qualified researchers. For Vivli industry members, we implement governance according to with the FPA pharma principles, ensuring alignment with these guidelines. The next one is funders and foundations as drivers for data sharing. You know, as this came out almost exactly 2 years ago, we're seeing them seek broader impact and long-term value from funded research, accountability, and return on investment, and the NIH data sharing policy compliance. We're seeing the fruits of this as well, and I think this was really well timed by the NIH to really nudge researchers to share. For funders, we meet the fair data sharing principles by providing tracking and reporting on KPIs related to their policy, and offer really specific support for researchers and NIH programs that wish to share using a generalist repository. So just to sum up, in terms of the evolution of transparency in clinical trial data, it certainly was important, extremely fundamental for the FDAA requirement for applicable trials to register. Summary data was mandated to be shared about 10 years later, and then raw data had a big push about 10 years ago with a number of different policies that came in place, the IOM data sharing report that came out, as well as the ICMJE and other policies that docked in. And now we are seeing that come into place in our platform. And next, I'm going to stop sharing, and as we move on to a few polls that will engage you. So I know we'll put some of these polls up, and I'm going to ask you in the next few minutes to answer some of these questions, and we'll show the responses to these polls. You can see the answers as they're coming in. It's about a 50-50 split for if you have people who have experience sharing. It's just really interesting. Actually, no, it's about 2/3, 1/3. And where people are sharing. So thank you so much. So really interesting data about where people which repository. You can see, people are sharing an NIH or funder repository, CSDR or clinical study data request, and Vivli. Really interesting. Okay, so we have a very experienced, fairly experienced audience, about 70-30 have experience sharing, and then really a smattering of those that have across different repositories. So wonderful responses. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn this over to my co-presenter, Julie, that will start her presentation on the components of a data sharing program. Julie?
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm just going to get my screen set up here. Here we go. So hi, everyone. I'm Julie Wood. Really nice to be here with all of you today. I'm really going to talk to you about, well, there my screen has a mind of its own. I'm going to talk to you about when to begin a data sharing program, how to manage it, and using Vivli as a case study. And I'm very much going to try to show you examples. So as we go through this, Alex will put some resources and references in the chat. But as a reminder, if you have questions, please do put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. There is quite a lot of you on the webinar today, but we'll do our best. So please do use the Q&A to answer any ask any questions, and we'll get to those at the end. Also, as a reminder, these slides will be shared as will a recording. So as you're getting into a data sharing program, we're particularly seeing 4 key milestones as you get for grant funded trials. So those key milestones that we see, the first one, particularly for those grant funded trials, for those funders and researchers and those who support researchers on the webinar today. The first one is clearly that grant submission process. The second milestone would be when that grant is awarded, the primary, and then once the trial is finished, you get to that primary publication is completed, and then the grant is closed out and that final completion, that study completion. So I'm going to take a moment to just walk through each one of those and talk through kind of what considerations are to make as you're looking at each one of those milestones for how and when to move those forward. So if we look at this first one, looking at the grant, as you're getting ready to prepare that grant submission as researchers are making that first step, the first thing, part of what they need to do is complete their data management and sharing plan. So for researchers who are submitting those grants, if they, as an example, if they want to use Vivli, we have web resources, and Alex, if you could put that in the chat for everyone, if they want to look at that, that gives an overview of how you can share. Very specifically, we have a data management and sharing plan guidance on Vivli as well that's linked to that page that can be used and kind of tailored and amended. We've included exemplary language, but be aware, that language is just suggestions. You do need to, researchers will really have to look at that language and make sure that it fits their example. That also includes budget justifications. Many funders allow data sharing as part of the budget of a grant proposal. And in addition, we also have a study submission checklist that is available as well for researchers to use to make sure they're clear on everything they need to think of when they're first starting their process. So if you're thinking about when you start thinking about data sharing, you do it right at the beginning when you're thinking about that grant submission stage. The next stage is once the grant is awarded. So once the grant's awarded and you're getting ready to start your trial, a key requirement and something to consider is you need to register your trial. And as Rebecca said, one of those registers you can use is clinicaltrials.gov. So here's an example of how an organization, you'll see that most of my examples are COVID examples. This is a trial, this is the Unity trial. It was a trial that was funded by the Gates Foundation. And Certara was asked to list, and they registered their trial, which is a grant requirement from the Gates Foundation. And then on element 12, this is their example of what they put in of how they would share individual participant level data. And they were very clear where they were going to be shared, what was going to be shared, and also made available that supporting information as well to make it very easy for researchers conducting secondary analysis to know where to find the data. The next step is once you're getting ready, the trial, you've got your primary publication, the study has moved much further along, you're going to submit and pull together your primary publication. And as part of that, as we talked through, you also need to make your statement available on the ICC, according to the ICMJE guidelines. You want to submit the data that underlies the publication. And as part of that process, you'll also receive a digital object identifier for your grant. This is a digital object identifier is very helpful because it's persistent. It never changes, which allows you for future researchers, including for the researchers overall, to make sure they can always find the underlying data that is used in that publication. So what you would do, and this again is available on Vivli, and Alex has a link that she can put in as well about guidance for how to answer the questions when you submit for the ICMJE to meet those guidelines. These are all in slightly different formats depending on the journal you're submitting, a researcher would be submitting to, but we have some helpful responses that might help a researcher and a grantee be able to meet those commitments as well for journals. So it just talks through kind of what you'll share, what data is available, what documents, as well as when, and it just talks through all of that. And again, that can be found on our website to make it easier for researchers. And then here is an example of how, again, another COVID example from a publication in the New England Journal of Medicine. Again, this is a COVID publication, and how that research team for their cardiovascular trial then published their publication, and then in their actual publication, you can see at the bottom here, they showed exactly how you can access the data and what was available. This example is for Vivli, and they listed the persistent digital object identifier directly in the article, again, to make it easier for researchers to find that information. So you can see that is all available there as an example when your primary publication completes. So then the last key milestone, and it really will depend on the funder what you have to share when, but certainly for most funders, you need to share when your study is completed and the grant ends. You have to you would also then need to share that final scientific data as well. And so that would be kind of the key final step, that you would share the full set of final scientific data And in a couple of slides, I'll get on to what that means in terms of what you would share as part of that final data package. So that's really the 4 key milestones for grant-funded trials. And then for industry, when do you start a data sharing program and here's an example of how Vivli members kind of meet their pharma FPA commitments for industry. They need to transparently state when they will share their trial data and what they will share. And here's an example from one of our members that helps them meet their pharma FPA commitments by being transparent about their policy. So I've talked a lot about the when. Let's talk about the what. So what is included in a data package? So for for academic or nonprofit clinical research, what Vivli would recommend as your data package would be your study protocol, your data dictionary. Now, data dictionary sometimes can be called your define file, but this is what we're talking about here with the data dictionary, is that it has a description of each variable in the data set. I would also like to put in a plea that you really make that data dictionary machine readable, which is much more useful for a researcher to be able to find the information that they need and move that forward. So a key component we would kind of recommend is that the data dictionary is machine readable. You're also going to include your statistical analysis plan. And of course, the IPD or individual participant level data set. And this would be the final anonymized data that you would share. And since that data has been anonymized, you also need to include the anonymization report and the approach, which explains how that data has been changed. That's very important to the researchers to be able to understand what they're receiving and what they can expect. Of course, there's more information that also you can also share, such as analytic code. So any pre-specified code to carry out additional analysis is always helpful to researchers who are conducting secondary analysis, and any case report forms, those could also be shared as well. So that's the recommended data package for a academic or nonprofit research clinical study. And then for industry, you could include all of the elements that I already talked through. Plus, then in addition, it would be kind of what we would recommend is for industry would also include the clinical study report. So that would be the report that summarizes the efficacy and safety data, as well as you could also optionally share the analysis ready IPD data set, which also can be very helpful to researchers to allow them to move forward with their work and to really move forward with their secondary analysis. So I've talked through the what and the when that is included. Now moving on with how do you manage a data sharing program? So from what we would really say and what we've seen in our experience is you can manage it either in-house or you can use a trusted partner. Either way, there's 3 areas to really think about when you're setting up a data sharing program. You need a mechanism for sharing. So you need a platform or a repository that is going to allow you to efficiently manage those requests that comes in, to store the data, to have the back and forth that needs to happen. So you'll have to build and manage that and make sure it stays up to date. Then you're going to need a team. You're going to need people to manage not only maintain the platform, but also manage all the legal agreements, the questions from users, generate any metrics to show your transparency of how your platform is performing and what's happening in terms of how you're sharing. You'll need then to anonymize the data as well as prepare the data. And then of course, you're also going to need a policy. So all of these, the mechanism and the team needs a policy that they're basing all this work on. So you'll have to draft and manage those data sharing policies and stay up to date on latest trends and what's going on. For example, how Rebecca mentioned AI and machine learning, and that's something we've spent an awful lot of time thinking about, of how to, as the world changes, as technology changes, how do you do that? So I'm going to use as a case study just to talk through, as an example, since Vivli is what we know, how can a partner such as Vivli or other platforms help you manage this? So I will kind of talk this through as the case study, so everyone kind of understands how you might work with a partner to do that. So Vivli, we're a nonprofit organization, and really what we try to do is really help everyone in the data sharing ecosystem make it easy to share and access the data. So we work all across industry, academia, government, nonprofit funders, and work with patient advocates as well to make sure this data sharing is happening. So we do that by harmonizing the language in our agreements and trying to increase the culture of more and more data sharings by removing those barriers and promoting incentives to data sharing. And the key way we do that is through our platform. So trying to make that as easy as possible for everyone to access the data and share their data. If we look at where Vivli's at today by the numbers, we have well over 7,500 trials that you can search for and request on our platform. We have 55 plus members currently. And from the requests we've received to date, we have well over 350 public disclosures, primarily publications, to drive forward kind of the science from that secondary analysis. And that's led to over 1,200 citations to add to the scientific literature. In terms of who our members are, we have over 30 industry members who work with Vivli to share their data and to use us as a partner to help them with their data sharing. We also work with academic organizations. So we have 6 academic organizations that have joined Vivli, primarily because of the new NIH data sharing policy to make it easy for their researchers to share their data and meet the NIH data sharing policy. So you can see Harvard, Stanford, UCSF, and many others use Vivli in that way. We also have foundations that we work with, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that we support their grantees in sharing their data through using Vivli. And then we also, you'll see there's 7 NIH programs that we work with as well. We work with those programs in various ways depending on what they need. So for some, we actually hold their data directly. For others, they work with us because they want to help meet the FAIR standards and make their data more discoverable, and also want to use our digital object identifiers, so those persistent identifiers. So we work with them in a myriad of different ways to meet their needs, to really make sure that sharing is happening, and that the data can really be accessed and analyzed in the easiest way possible. So I'll just briefly walk you through, as an example, how Vivli works for a data requester. So the first step a researcher would do is they're going to search through Vivli for the studies that answer their research question. They will add those all to their request, and they would submit a request to Vivli, and then each of the members would review that request according to their publicly stated commitments, and it would go through that governance process. And then once that's approved, Vivli would sign the legal agreements with the institution, and then the researchers would access the data. Some of the data in Vivli can be downloaded. So a researcher could just download that data, meeting kind of security commitments, and then they would conduct their research and move forward. Some of the other data in Vivli is only held in our secure research environment or secure sandbox. Think of that as a desktop up in the cloud. You have all the tools and everything you would expect to be able to conduct your analysis, but it'd be held more securely, and that data could not be removed. And so a researcher can go in and they can use all those tools to analyze the data, and then they're allowed to take out kind of their summary or aggregate level results for their publication. And then we would follow up with them, with the researchers, to make sure they're meeting their publication commitments to really drive forward that science. And those results would also receive a persistent identifier. So that's how Vivli works. This is just an example of what that secure environment looks like, with all the tools that are available. This is really important if we think about the role that Vivli plays and what we are trying to do. So because we have so many members, all this data is held and you can analyze it all in one place, which makes it much easier for the researchers to conduct the analysis they need. In this example, you have data from BioLink, Johnson & Johnson, Import. So the BioLink and Import are two NIH platforms. Project Datasphere is also a member of Vivli, and then GSK as well. So all this data has been requested through Vivli, and then a researcher can access all that data in one secure place to conduct their analysis, and then they can bring out their aggregate data to publish. And really why this is so important, why I wanted to talk about this, is not only because we're working to make sure the data is findable, but also that we're moving forward science, because that's what Vivli is here for, to really make it possible for science to move forward, to really think about participants and their use of that data so that is used more than once to move forward the science of what we're trying to do and meet our mission of advancing human health. So that's the end of my case study. I'm going to turn over to Rebecca now so that she can talk kind of the key take-home messages, and then we'll move to Q&A. So just again, I would ask everyone to please post your questions in chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. Rebecca, over to you.
And thank you so much for joining us. So just three actually key take-home messages. And again, I see a few questions coming into the chat. And is the revision to the Declaration of Helsinki really emphasizes the ethical obligations to facilitate responsible reuse of health data while ensuring patient privacy and informed consent for identified viable data or de-identified data. For platforms such as ours that only accepts anonymized data, we are not currently taking any action based on the revisions. However, we are looking over our obligations in terms of potentially re-identifiable data, in terms of the risks of AI. But currently, we are not under any actions based on Declaration of Helsinki. Of course, DOH is an ethical document and not a regulatory document. But those of you who have de-identified data in databases might want to give it a deeper read based on Declaration of Helsinki and Declaration of Taipei. Key drivers of data sharing, really we've seen the culture change based on data sharing. Really have been funders, industry, government policies, and journals. Partnering with a platform, Vivli or other platforms that can be useful for an efficient and practical implementation for a successful data sharing initiative. So those are really our key take-home messages. Next slide, please. So if there are any questions for us, or you have additional questions, please feel free to email us directly or use the Q&A function. I just do see a few questions coming in. And Julie, if you want to take the first one, if CSRs are clinical study reports that are part of the regulatory requirement for industry studies, are they coded or tagged on Vivli so they can be easily identified for researchers? Would you like to take that first question?
Sure, I'm happy to start, and then Rebecca, please add in anything else you think I might have missed. So clinical study reports, it will usually say if they are available. Most of our members, if you go onto their member page, like the example that I showed, they will state if they share the CSRs. Most will share the main part of the CSRs. They don't necessarily share the specifics just because of specific cases, because of risk of re-identifiability. So you can access those. You also can submit an inquiry if there's specific studies where you would like the CSR as well. And that link is also available on our website. So you can see what's available and easily identifiable. Rebecca, did you have anything else you wanted to add to?
No, yeah, I think also, and I don't know if you covered this, but specific sponsors also show what they're sharing on their member pages. Yeah.
Great.
And then there's another question on what Vivli will change to meet the Declaration of Helsinki requirements. I think specifically what we're doing is, there's nothing pointed right now to anonymize databases. Really, their focus is on identifiable data, de-identified data that will be shared. I mean, we are really working on those, the increased risk potentially of AI or ML algorithms. And we are getting a lot more requests that involve either artificial learning algorithms or large language models. They do pose an additional risk because of the risk of re-identification. We will be coming out shortly with a framework of how to manage those. And we'll be coming out with that publicly, and we'll be having a communication regarding that, either through conferences or others. So thank you so much. So one question there is if there's any ongoing collaborations with patient community organizations in the data sharing process. It's a really excellent question. We think the patient community, I mean, patients as partners are extremely important. So first and foremost, I would invite any of the people that are part of a patient organization that would like to collaborate with us to connect with us directly. We do have a number of organizations that we do collaborate with, but we are always open to collaborating with patient organizations directly if they're interested in data sharing or specifically. We do have several patient advocates and patient organizations that are on our external advisory board. And I think that's really important to hear from the patient community directly and that they are our advisors. So excellent question. And we do invite those patient organizations that might be listening in to contact Julie or myself directly. We'd love to dialogue with you specifically. Thank you. Other questions? Again, we do invite you to communicate with us directly. We will be sharing the slides and the PowerPoints, the webinar with you as a link thereafter. So if there are no other questions, we'll close out the webinar and we'd love to connect with you. Thank you so much for your engagement, your great questions today, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Is a funder of this study.